It was just another brisk evening on the outskirts of town when Officer Jack Reynolds found himself patrolling the quiet, tree-lined streets of Maplewood. The amber glow of the setting sun streaked through the horizon, casting long shadows over the pavement. Jack had worked this route for years, a routine he once found solace in but now endured in silence. Ever since the tragedy 5 years ago, the days had blended into each other, punctuated only by fleeting reminders of the daughter he had lost. Emily. Her name still stung his heart like a fresh wound, a name he whispered every night before sleep overtook him. As his squad car rolled to a stop at a red light, Jack glanced at a group of teenagers walking down the sidewalk. They were laughing carefree, their chatter faint through the car window. It tugged at something deep inside him. A longing, a reminder of a time when Emily would burst through the front door after school, her face lit up with the same kind of joy. But life had a cruel way of changing paths, and Jack had long learned to bury that pain beneath a stoic exterior. Just as the light turned green, a flash of movement caught his eye. A girl, no older than 16, darted across the crosswalk. She wore a faded hoodie and ripped jeans, her head bowed as if trying to avoid attention. Jack wouldn't have thought twice about her, but something, maybe a cop's instinct or maybe something deeper, made him look again. It wasn't her face, though he barely saw it. It was her bracelet. A simple silver chain with a small, heart-shaped charm dangling from it. His heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be, could it? Jack shook his head, trying to dismiss the thought, but his hands were already turning the wheel, guiding the car toward the girl. He slowed as he neared the curb and rolled down the passenger window. "Hey, miss," he called out, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Can I have a word with you?" The girl froze mid-step, her shoulders tensing. She turned slowly, her face partially hidden under the hood. "I didn't do anything," she said, her tone defensive but edged with fear. Jack held up a hand, a practiced gesture meant to convey calm. "You're not in trouble," he assured her. "I just need to ask you something." She hesitated, glancing around as if calculating her chances of escape. But something in Jack's expression must have made her pause. She stepped closer to the car, just enough for the evening light to reveal her features. And Jack's breath hitched. The resemblance was uncanny. The same chestnut brown hair, the same freckled cheeks that Emily used to have. But it was the bracelet that made his chest tighten. He knew that bracelet. He had given it to Emily on her 10th birthday. It was custom-made, one of a kind. "What's your name?" Jack asked, his voice soft now, almost trembling. The girl hesitated, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Why do you want to know?" Jack leaned slightly out of the window, his eyes searching hers. "Because that bracelet, it belonged to my daughter." The girl's expression shifted, a flicker of something Jack couldn't quite place, fear, confusion, or maybe recognition. She instinctively clutched the bracelet with her other hand, as if shielding it from him. "That's not possible," she said, shaking her head. "I've had this bracelet my whole life." Jack's mind raced. Was it a coincidence? A cruel twist of fate? Or was there something more to this encounter? He felt the weight of 1,000 questions pressing down on him. But the girl's guarded stance warned him not to push too hard. "Please," he said, his voice cracking under the strain. "Just tell me your name." The girl hesitated again, her lips parting as if to speak. But before she could answer, a car honked loudly from behind Jack's squad car, breaking the fragile moment. The girl flinched and took a step back. "I have to go," she said quickly, turning on her heel and disappearing into the crowd before Jack could react. Jack sat frozen, his hands gripping the steering wheel as the reality of what just happened sank in. The bracelet, her face, the way her eyes seemed to mirror a pain he knew all too well. It couldn't all be a coincidence, could it? He stayed at the sidewalk, where the girl had been moments before, his mind made up. He wasn't sure what this meant, but he was determined to find out. Because deep down in a place he rarely let himself explore, a tiny spark of hope had ignited. And for the first time in years, Jack felt alive again. Jack couldn't shake the image of the girl from his mind. As he drove down the quiet streets, the echoes of her voice and the sight of that bracelet replayed like a broken record. The logical part of him told him it was impossible. Emily was gone. He had stood at her graveside, his knees buckling under the weight of his grief. He had seen the flowers wilt over time, just as his hope had withered. But tonight, something had shifted, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. Back at the station, Jack's colleagues were wrapping up their shifts. The air smelled faintly of coffee and stale paper, the usual signs of a long day. Jack barely noticed. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at the report he was supposed to file, the pen in his hand unmoving. His thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The bracelet. He knew every detail of it, the tiny engraved initials on the back of the heart, the way the chain shimmered under the light. It wasn't something you could mistake. And yet, it was on the wrist of a stranger, a girl who couldn't possibly have any connection to his daughter. Could she? Reynolds? A familiar voice snapped him out of his daze. It was Officer Karen Lopez, one of the few people at the station who still tried to reach out to him now and then. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Jack hesitated, the words forming in his mind before he could stop them. Maybe I have. Karen raised an eyebrow, taking the seat across from him. She was tough but kind, the type of person who didn't pry, unless she thought it was necessary. Want to talk about it? Jack sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I saw someone tonight. A girl. She looked like Emily. Karen's face softened, but her tone remained steady. Jack, you've been through a lot. Sometimes, when we're holding on to something, our mind can play tricks. It wasn't just her face, Jack interrupted, his voice firmer now. It was the bracelet, the one I gave Emily, the exact same one. Karen didn't dismiss him outright, which he appreciated. Instead, she leaned back, considering his words. Did you talk to her? Jack nodded. Briefly. She got spooked and took off before I could get much out of her. And you're sure it's the same bracelet? Positive, Jack said without hesitation. It's not something you'd find in a store. I had it custom made for her. Karen pursed her lips, her brow furrowing in thought. Could be a coincidence. Maybe it ended up in a thrift shop or something. But if you're sure, you might want to dig a little deeper. That was all Jack needed to hear. He spent the next few hours sifting through reports and surveillance footage, trying to piece together anything he could about the girl. His police training kicked in, giving him a methodical focus that kept his emotions at bay. He reviewed traffic cameras from the area, hoping to catch a better look at her. It was tedious work, but Jack was nothing if not determined. As the clock ticked past midnight, he finally found what he was looking for. A grainy image from a street camera showed the girl walking briskly down the sidewalk, her hood still up. Jack zoomed in as much as he could without distorting the image. Her face wasn't entirely clear, but it was enough to confirm what he already knew, the resemblance to Emily was striking. He saved the image and leaned back in his chair, exhaustion creeping in. But his work wasn't done. He needed to know more. Who was she? Where did she come from? And how had she ended up with that bracelet? The questions swirled in his mind like a storm, each one demanding an answer. He couldn't let this go. Not now. The next day, Jack decided to follow up on the few leads he had. He started by canvassing the area where he'd seen her. It was a mix of small businesses, apartments, and a nearby park. A place where people tended to come and go without much notice. Jack showed the grainy image to shop owners and passers-by, asking if anyone recognized her. Most shook their heads, their faces apologetic but uninterested. Finally, at a corner convenience store, a cashier squinted at the photo. Yeah, I've seen her before, he said, chewing on a piece of gum. She comes in sometimes. Always buys the same thing. A bottle of water and a pack of gum. Doesn't talk much. Do you know her name? Jack asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The cashier shrugged. No idea. She keeps to herself. but I think she hangs around the park a lot. You might catch her there." It wasn't much, but it was something. Jack thanked the cashier and headed to the park, his heart pounding with anticipation. The park was quiet that afternoon, the bare branches of the trees swaying gently in the breeze. He walked the paths slowly, his eyes scanning every face, every figure. And then he saw her. She was sitting on a bench near the edge of the playground, her hoodie pulled back this time. Her hair caught the sunlight, the chestnut-brown strands glinting like copper. She was staring at the ground, her fingers idly tracing the charm on the bracelet. Jack approached cautiously, not wanting to startle her. "Hey," he said softly, stopping a few feet away. "Do you remember me?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. She didn't say anything, but the way she shifted on the bench told him she was ready to run. "I'm not here to scare you," Jack said quickly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I need to know about that bracelet." The girl hesitated, her fingers tightening around the charm. "Why do you care so much?" "Because it belonged to my daughter," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. She's not here anymore. And seeing you with it." "I've always had this bracelet," she interrupted, her tone defensive. "It's mine." Jack crouched slightly, bringing himself to her level. "Maybe it is. I don't know how. But can you at least tell me where you got it? Please." The girl's expression softened for a brief moment, but then she shook her head. "I don't know. I've just always had it." Before Jack could press further, a voice called out from across the park. "Sophie." The girl flinched and looked over her shoulder. A woman was walking toward them, her pace brisk and her expression tense. Sophie, if that was her name, stood up quickly, the panic in her eyes returning. "I have to go," she said hurriedly. "Wait," Jack pleaded, but Sophie was already backing away. The woman reached her, placing a protective arm around her shoulder as she whispered something Jack couldn't hear. They turned and walked away, leaving Jack standing there, his heart sinking. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that the answers were just out of reach. As he watched Sophie disappear into the distance, one thing was clear. This was far from over. Jack watched as Sophie and the woman disappeared into the distance, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. He felt like a thread unraveling, trying to hold on to something fleeting. He didn't know who that woman was, her mother, a guardian, someone else entirely, but it was clear she was shielding Sophie from him. There was a protectiveness in her posture, but also something guarded, like she didn't want Jack getting too close. For the rest of the day, Jack replayed the encounter in his mind, questioning every detail. Was Sophie lying about the bracelet? Did she really not know where it came from? And who was the woman? Could she have answers Jack desperately needed? The next morning, Jack returned to the park, hoping Sophie might show up again, but the bench where he had found her was empty. He stayed for hours, watching the ebb and flow of people, feeling more like a bystander than a cop. No sign of her. He couldn't keep coming back here ominously. He needed a plan. Back at the station, Jack tried to approach the situation from a professional angle. He filed a query about Sophie, providing a description and what little information he had. He didn't have much to go on, just a name, a blurry photo, and the faint connection to a bracelet. It wasn't enough to launch an official investigation, but Jack knew how to dig quietly. Days turned into a week with no sign of Sophie. Jack's frustration grew, but so did his determination. He combed through missing person databases, half expecting to find her photo among the entries. He didn't, but it left him with more questions. Where was she from? Was she in some kind of trouble? If so, why did she seem so reluctant to talk to him? On a hunch, Jack decided to visit the convenience store again. The cashier, who was slouching behind the counter with the same bored expression, perked up when Jack walked in. "You find her?" the young man asked casually. "No," Jack admitted. "But I need your help. Next time you see her, can you let me know? She might have answers I need." The cashier raised an eyebrow. "What kind of answers?" Jack hesitated. He didn't want to divulge too much. "It's personal," he said finally, "but it's important." The cashier shrugged. "Sure, I'll keep an eye out." With that, Jack left, feeling like he was grasping at straws. His days became consumed by the search, and his nights were haunted by dreams of Emily. A laugh, a smile, and then the cold, crushing reality of losing her. He hadn't felt this kind of pull in years, a gnawing sense that something wasn't right and that he had to set it straight. Then one night, as Jack sat at his desk poring over reports, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "She's here. Come quick." Jack's pulse quickened. He grabbed his keys and bolted out the door, driving to the convenience store in record time. The cashier was standing outside, hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "She left a minute ago," he said, nodding toward the street. "Heading that way?" "Thanks," Jack said, already moving. He caught sight of her a block away, her figure unmistakable even in the dim streetlights. "Sophie," he called out, his voice carrying down the quiet street. She stopped, glancing over her shoulder, then broke into a run. "Wait," Jack shouted, his footsteps pounding against the pavement. He wasn't as fast as he used to be, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Sophie ducked into an alley, and Jack followed, his chest heaving as he closed the gap. When he turned the corner, she was there, pressed against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. "Leave me alone," she shouted, her voice trembling. Jack held up his hands, trying to catch his breath. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said between gulps of air. "I just need to talk." Sophie's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "Why can't you just leave it alone?" "Because I think there's more to this than you're telling me," Jack said, his tone steady but firm. "That bracelet, it's not just some random piece of jewelry. It belonged to my daughter." "I told you, I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie snapped, but her voice cracked, betraying her nerves. "Please," Jack said, his voice softening. "If you know anything at all, it could mean everything to me." Sophie hesitated, her hand instinctively clutching the bracelet again. For a moment, Jack thought she might open up. But then the woman from the park appeared at the entrance to the alley. "Sophie," she called, her voice sharp. Sophie's head snapped toward her, and the fear in her eyes deepened. "I have to go," she said quickly. The woman strode toward them, her expression stern. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, glaring at Jack. "I'm just trying to talk to her," Jack said, trying to keep his composure. "She doesn't owe you anything," the woman said firmly, stepping between them. "You need to leave her alone." "Who are you?" Jack asked, his frustration boiling over. "And why are you so determined to keep her away from me?" The woman didn't answer. She put a protective arm around Sophie and started to walk away. Jack took a step forward, but Sophie turned back, her eyes meeting his for the briefest moment. "Please don't follow us," she said softly. Jack stopped in his tracks, the weight of her words sinking in. He watched them disappear into the night, his heart heavy with unanswered questions. Something about the woman's demeanor, the way she shielded Sophie, made Jack suspect there was more to this story than he initially thought. As he stood alone in the alley, the realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't just about a bracelet or a resemblance. There was a deeper truth hidden in Sophie's fear, in the woman's protectiveness, and in the strange pull Jack felt every time he saw her. He didn't know where this would lead, but one thing was certain. He couldn't walk away. Not now.